Purpose of this video is to show you how to install Oracle Business Intelligence 12c on a AWS EC2 instance. So I have clicked the launch instance in the EC2 AWS panel, and you can see here it's asking me to choose a machine image. So I'm going to search my community AMIs for the Oracle Linux 7. You'll see that finds it pretty much straight away, and I'm going to go ahead and select the 64-bit version of this. Now, for Oracle Business Intelligence, we need a little bit more horsepower than we need in, for instance, the video where I show you how to install an Oracle database. Really, for an OBIEE instance in what I'm going to show you today to be useful, you're going to need to select this T2 medium instance, which gives us 2 virtual CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. Now, this is a pretty affordable instance as long as you shut it off when you're not using it. And I think in the companion post to this video, I mentioned that a developer utilizing an instance 50 hours a week should be able to spend less than $50 a month on the database and OBIEE instance infrastructure you need from AWS. So I'm going to go ahead and select this T2 medium instance, and then I'm going to work on configuring some of the other details we need to. So I'm going to choose the West region because that just happens to be where I have a database instance living that I'm going to use for holding the repository schema for this OBIEE instance. So after I ensure this is going to be in that same area, I'm going to add some storage. Now, you'll see this starts with a 15 gigabyte root storage, which is what I recommend going with this instance. And then we're going to add a couple of additional volumes here in order to make sure we have enough space for everything we want to do. The first volume I'm going to want is just a 5 gigabyte swap partition that we can use for swap space on the server, and I'll be showing you how to format that and set that up. The next volume we're going to want is a 15 gigabyte volume for the UO1, or the home that we're going to use for our OBIEE installation. And then if I was going to do it on this particular instance, we would want another 15 gigabyte partition to stick all of the OBIEE zip files and software for the install. Now, I happen to already have a volume that has all this software on it, so I'm not going to add that volume to this particular instance. But if you were starting fresh and we're going to need to upload the software to do the installs, this is how I would recommend doing it. And the reason is once you've done the installs, you can go ahead and throw this volume away and not have to eat all this space related with the install files. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect that, and here we have a 15 gig root volume, a 5 gig swap volume, and then a 15 gig volume that we're going to use for our actual software. Next, I'm just going to go ahead and tag this instance, and we will call this 12c OBIEE AWS EC2. All right, and next I'm going to configure a security group. Now, you'll see here that your instances start out a lot of times with this port 22 open to the whole world. A lot of times, or what I recommend is that you either change this to your IP or perhaps to some custom IP so it isn't open to the whole world. But for the sake of laziness today, I'm just going to leave this on anywhere because I don't really plan to keep this instance after we do this demo. Another rule you're going to want to add in here just while you're getting started is to open up port 3389, which we're going to actually be using to RDP into this instance. I'm going to show you how to install a desktop on your Linux instance, which really just, especially for beginners, makes life a lot easier to do installs and any of sort of basic stuff you need to do when it comes to messing with your Linux instance. Now, when you're complete with your OBIEE install, you're also going to want to open up the ports for your analytics and console applications so that you can actually access those from the outside world. And I'm going to go ahead and add those rules right now because I have a pretty good idea of what those ports are going to be. So the first port I'm going to set up is 9502, which should be the port that analytics is located at. And then for my WebLogic console, I guess I want to say that that one will be located at 7001, but if that doesn't turn out to be the port, if I'm misremembering that, we can just come back to this panel at any time and change these rules. So we're going to make all these open to anywhere for the time being, and like I said, I don't recommend doing this. You should set this to a specific IP, but for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to keep things easy. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch this instance, and AWS is going to reinforce what I just told you, which is to say this is bad practice with the ports that we have open. And now I'm just going to go ahead and click launch, and this will ask me to use a key pair, which I have already generated. If you haven't done this, I'm going to assume that you can sort of follow along with the instructions, but this key pair is what we will use to connect to this instance with MOBA Xterm when we're doing some of our initial setups and when we want to log in that way. So I'm going to go ahead, click launch, and now this will tell me that it's going to go ahead and launch my instance. So I'm going to go ahead and view. And this really only takes maybe a minute or so, maybe two to get going. So if we click up here on our instance, we'll see that it'll show us the public DNS that it's going to be using right here. And we can actually get our MOBA Xterm connection set up while we wait for this instance to finish up being created. So I'm going to copy that public DNS entry, and I'm going to pull up MOBA Xterm here and bring this into our window. And I'm just going to create a new connection. If you're not familiar with MOBA Xterm, I'll be sure to put a link to this on the companion blog post. And this is a open source software that you can go get, and I highly recommend. So for our first connection to this instance, I'm just going to paste that DNS entry in here. For these EC2 instances, the EC2 user will be the cryptic EC2-user. And then on the advanced SSH settings, I'm going to go ahead and click this use private key, and I'm going to associate the key file with this that I have already downloaded. So now I have the key pair here, and I should be able to connect to this instance using MOBA Xterm if it's alive and kicking. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And actually, before I click OK, I'm going to change this bookmark so I know what I'm looking at here. So we'll just say OBIEE 12C EC2. So that's easy for me to find in my left-hand navigation, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So now I've got this connection created, and we can actually check back on our Amazon instance and see how it's doing. So according to the AWS console, this is running, and in theory we should be able to connect to it. So we'll just double check here and see if it's ready for us to connect, or whether we need to wait a second here. So you can see that we've actually connected to this EC2 instance, and if we take a look here, you can see that we are in our EC2 user home and there isn't anything present. If we were to switch to up to root here and do a list, we would see that this machine is set up sort of in a typical fashion for an Oracle install with a UO1 directory already sitting there, and the other things you would expect to see from a base Linux instance here. So the first thing that we're going to do is change our EC2 user password so that when we want to switch between users, we can actually use that. So the way you do that is to type sudo and pass wd and ec2-user, and then it will prompt us for the new password. And I'm going to go ahead and enter just a poorly formed password, and it will probably yell at me for using something so simple. And now I'm going to retype this, and that will change our EC2 password to a known password, which will be handy for us when we want to flip back and forth. Okay, so now that we have changed our EC2 user, we actually need to prepare this machine for the installation of Oracle Business Intelligence. So the first thing that I like to do is get all our directories squared away. So if you type the df-h command, you'll see all the volumes that are available to use here for this. And if we type the ls block command, we can see the volumes that haven't necessarily been mounted or attached to this machine yet, and these are the ones that we need to actually do some stuff with. Okay, so this very top volume, this is your root directory, and we don't need to mess with that, but these bottom two are the directory that the volume that we want to use for our swap space, and then this is our UO1 volume that we're actually going to do the install on, and I'm also going to attach an additional volume here in a second that will have our software that we're going to use to install here. So first thing we want to do is get our swap partition ready to go here. And before we do that, we're just going to take care of a little bit of housekeeping and getting some stuff installed. So first, and these are all on the blog post, I'm just going to get some basic utilities going here. So we're going to make sure that wget is installed. We're going to make sure that Perl is installed. And then the last thing I'm going to do, which may seem a little bit odd, is I'm actually going to use Oracle's pre-install script for the Oracle database. And the reason I'm doing this is because it actually just creates the group and users, and I found this to just be as handy for OBIEE as it is for the Oracle database. So this is just a pure function of laziness and reusing some stuff that Oracle's provided for another service. And once it goes through all of this, we'll be ready to actually start messing with the swap space here. All right, so we can see that this process has finished. I'm just going to clean our screen up here, and now we need to actually do some formatting of these disks. When you attach a volume to your Linux instance, it's not going to be formatted. So I'm going to issue this ls block command one more time so I can see these volume names over here and kind of know what I'm up to here. So what we're going to want to do is actually use this make swap command on the 5 gig volume here, and this so the volume is going to be identified by dev, which is just excluded here, and then this xvdb that you see right here. So I just type xvdb, and now when I do this, it will format this. Oh, sorry, needed to use the sudo command as a piece of that. And it's going to format this as a swap partition. So now that we have done that, we can actually turn the swap on and then make an entry in our fstab file, which will ensure that this swap space is attached to our machine every time it's rebooted. So first thing I'm going to do is issue the swap on command. And we're going to reference this xvdb volume again. And now if we want to check the status of this, we can actually type the free-m, and you can see that that swap is set up and available to be used by the machine. So now we're going to make an entry to the fstab directory to add that swap entry in there. So the way that we do this is we actually switch to the fstab file, and I'm just going to go sudo vi for the vim editor and then type the location of the file. Now you can see we've got our fstab file open. I'm going to hit I to allow me to add an entry to it. And then we're going to go ahead and add the entry we need for this to be attached every time. So that's just dev and then the x vdb to identify our volume, and then the other pieces it needs to know that this is a swap partition. And we can hit escape and write that. And now if we want to just double check that we didn't mess up our fstab file here, we can do sudo mount -a, and then that just refreshes that and tells us that there's nothing wrong with our entry there. So now our swap volume will be mounted every time that we need to restart our system. And all these commands can be found on the companion post that goes along with this video. So the next thing that we need to do is actually format the drive that we're going to use for the software install. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to issue this ls block command one more time. And we can see that xvdc is the volume that we need to format to use for our software install. So we're using the sudo command again, going to format this volume. And when we do that, it will tell us, it will format that volume for us so that we can use it. And now we just need to do the same thing where we actually make an entry to mount this volume to this instance every time it's restarted. And we actually want this to mount to the U01 directory. So in order to mount it, we would, if we just wanted to do it right here, we could type sudo and mount and type U01, and then before that U01, we'd actually want to give the volume, so it would be that dev XVDC. And now if I just execute that command, we can see that if we switch to the, or if we do the df-h, we can see we have a 15 gig drive for that XVDC mounted here at UO1. So now we're going to want to go to the FS tab file one more time to make sure this entry is in there as well, so that this is automatically mounted properly when the machine is restarted. So again, I'm just going to do sudo vi for the Vim editor, and then we're going to go to that FS tab file. Okay, so here we are in the FS tab file, and you can see I've made the entry for the UO1 directory. We've specified that the XVDC volume will be mapped to the UO1 directory using the format of the drive, and just defaults from there for that entry. So the last thing that we need to do here is actually attach the drive that has our software inventory on it. So first thing I'm going to do is just make a directory for this drive. So we'll do sudo make dir, and I'm just going to call this inv for a directory. And then if we wanted to mount that directory, you can see I've done the ls block command up above here, and it's this xvdf entry that actually has the volume where that software lives. So I'm going to say sudo mount, and then we're going to specify that xvdf directory, or XVDF volume, and we're going to map it to this inv directory that we just created here. So go ahead and do that, and now if I switch to the inv directory and do a list, I can see all of the software that's sitting there. So last thing, just in case I need this over time, I just want to make sure that that is also in our FS tab file, so that will automatically mount. So just going to switch back here, and really this entry will be exactly the same as the one we just made, except we're going to change the volume reference and the directory that it points to here. So I'm just going to do dev xvdf/inv, and then it's the same format. And so if we save this and we do the sudo mount-a to check that everything is okay, see our FS tab is all squared away. So now we have all of the directories on our machine that we need. We have our UO1, we have our swap space, we have our UO1, and we have our inventory, and these will all mount every time we turn the machine on. So next, with just a couple more tasks, we'll be ready to actually start installing the software. So the last piece we're going to want to do here is actually change the password for the Oracle user that would have been created as a result of us running the 12c database pre-install script. So if we say sudo and password and Oracle, it will ask us what we want the password to be. And for the sake of simplicity, I will use bad practice there. And now we have our Oracle password switched to a password that we know, and we should be able to log in with this user with just a couple of additional changes in order to facilitate that process. So what we need to do is actually make it possible for the Oracle user to connect, and then we also need to change the ownership of a couple of directories for the Oracle user to own those. So first I'm just going to do that change ownership, and that's pretty simple. We just using the sudo command again are going to change ownership to the Oracle user, the oinstall group for the UO1 directory. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing for the INV directory. And now the Oracle user is the owner of those two things, and that'll make the install possible to do without any interference from permissions or things of that nature. So the next thing we need to do is make it possible for the Oracle user to connect externally. So what I'm going to do is actually switch to the Oracle user using the switch user command. It will ask me for the password, which I will give, and you can see now I'm switched to the Oracle user. Next, I'm just going to ensure that I am in my home directory here for the Oracle user, and I can prove that by using the present working directory command. And now I'm going to make a directory that contains the key that will allow our user to connect. So I'm going to go ahead and make that .ssh directory, and that's where we're going to store our key file. Then I'm going to change the permissions on that directory, and then I'm going to create an authorized keys file, and this is what's going to allow us to connect. So that creates the file right there. Now I'm going to change the permissions on that file as well. And then lastly, to put the key into this file, I'm actually going to use Amazon has a command to get the current public key from your system. So I'm just going to paste this here, and we can see in the paste process my redirection here just got written over. So what we're going to do is just get the public key and stick it into that authorized key file here. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that command. And then if we just wanted to double check that quickly, we could by switching there, but confidence is high from my perspective that that the value's been put into that authorized key file. So now we should be able to log out of the system and log back in as the Oracle user. So in MOBA Xterm here, I'm just going to go ahead and close this window and confirm. And now I'm going to go back to my session and edit it, and instead of using the EC2 user, I'm going to use the Oracle user. Okay, so now I say OK, double click this to connect, and we can see that now we are logged in as the Oracle user and are actually prepared to start the install of our software. Now that I'm logged in as my Oracle user, I'm going to want to install the desktop for for this instance so that we can use that as a part of our install. So we're just going to switch user to root here to make our lives easy to do this. And although the sudo commands in front of all these probably aren't necessary, I'm just or aren't necessary, they just happen to be in there for convenience sake. So this command will actually do the get us started in installing the components that we need to support our desktop, and this takes a minute to complete. Okay, now that's done installing, we can issue the rest of the commands we need to issue in order to get things set up. So next we're going to focus on getting the desktop configured, and you can find all these commands on my companion post, and it'll actually lead you back to where I borrowed all this stuff from. And we need to get our desktop server all set up here as well. So we will just issue all of these commands to get this squared away. And then we'll need to finally make it possible for us to start our RDP and make sure that the firewall is open so that we can connect. If you remember at the very beginning when we were configuring our Amazon instance, we opened the same port 3389 that we're actually going to open right now with this command. So you do need to open it both on the instance and then utilizing the controls on the Amazon panel to make it possible to access the desktop. So now at this point we ought to be able to connect using our Oracle user to the remote desktop using the GNOME desktop, and then this remote desktop service should auto start every time you restart your instance as well. So to prove that, we'll just go ahead and close this session down, and we're going to go back to this session that we had here. We're going to edit it, and we're going to switch it to RDP session. Now it's going to ask us to enter the host name in again, which we will do, and we'll give it the Oracle user. And that should be all we need to do here in order to make this go. So if we say OK, and we double click this session, it's going to want our Oracle user password that we set. And the first time we log in, it should actually ask us for a couple of set a couple other passwords, and this is just sort of a quirk for the GNOME desktop here. All right, and then you see our setup screen, which we can just kind of jump through, set the defaults, and now we have a desktop ready to use, and we can actually perform our installs from this desktop here. Okay, now that we have our desktop up and going, I'm going to open a terminal and I'm going to switch to our inventory directory. Take a look, and what I want to do is actually install the latest version of Java at the time I'm making this video here. So I'm just going to switch my user to root, and then I'm going to issue command to install the JDK. That should just take a second. And then the other thing that I'm going to want to do is make sure for my Oracle user that my Java home is set every time that I log in to the system. So the way I'm going to do that is just to alter my bash profile here. Don't need this extra terminal. So we're just going to do that with our bash profile. So now that I have this open, come down here. We'll leave this original path definition in here, but we will not need this export here because we're going to put a new one in. All right, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is just set the Java home to where the JDK that we just installed would have been placed. And then I'm just going to want to make sure that the path variable is exported as well. And so once I have those couple entries in there, That should take care of our Java home for our Oracle user. I will write that, and then just to double check that we didn't break our bash profile, we can just reload it quickly. So that looks like all is well. And at this point, we can actually go ahead and install SQL Developer, which will be helpful for us because we're going to want to confirm that we can connect to our database, and then we're also going to want to confirm that we have a pluggable database set up for our OBIEE repository. Okay, there's a couple other things you'll want to do to make your life easy and preserve your sanity. First, with the desktop, you're going to want to turn off the automatic lock screen and log out with the GNOME desktop. It'll drive you crazy. So I've already installed the gconfig editor, but if you wanted to install it, you could just use the yum install gconfig editor. And if I execute this command, it'll just tell me there's nothing to do because I already have it installed. And then once that's complete, you ought to be able to find this application under Sundry and Configuration Editor. Alternately, you could hit Alt F2 and type in gconfig or gconf-editor. So when we open this up, we're going to want to actually make an entry here and put a new key in. So the entry I'm going to want to make is to disable the lockout and lock screen and logout, and I'm going to want to make this Boolean and set it to true and say OK. And now that that entry is in there, it should keep the desktop from automatically locking out or timing out on us, which can be particularly annoying when we're doing an install. So now that we've gotten that taken care of, we can go ahead and quit the configuration editor. And last thing we'll want to do before we get to installing OBIEE is to install SQL Developer. So I'm just going to open a terminal here, and I am going to switch to my inventory directory. And if we take a look here, we'll see that I've got this SQL Developer download already in here with the rest of my software. So to install that, we can just use the basically the same command we use to install Java, just referencing SQL Developer instead. And before I do this, I'm going to want to switch to root. And then we're just going to do rpm-ivh, and we're going to put in the path for the name for the SQL Developer file here, and go ahead and install. All right, now that SQL Developer is installed, we should actually see an icon for it up here under the programming in our applications menu. And if we click on SQL Developer, one thing we'll notice the first time we do this is we get no response from that shortcut. And there's actually a reason for this. And the reason is because the SQL Developer shell file doesn't it is looking for the Java home on our system, or is looking for the location of a JDK in order to actually be able to open. And the first time you ever touch that, it doesn't prompt you from the shortcut. So what you have to do is actually go find the SQL Developer executable and run it manually the first time. So I'm just going to do find name SQL Developer .sh, And we can see here that it's located in this directory right here. So if we switch to that directory, we'll find the executable here, which in the Linux case is the sh file. You can see when we run this now, it actually asks us for the path to a JDK installation. So if we open a separate terminal here, we can actually find this. So if we open a new terminal, the place that we will find Java is in the user directory. And our JDK will be located right here. And so if we switch to this JDK, then we can use our present working directory and get the path that we need to feed to the SQL developer here. So now I'll just copy that, bring this over here, and paste it in. And we can see that SQL developer will fire up now. So now that we've started SQL developer up, we should be able to actually close it and come back to our window here and start it up. Now you'll see what's happened here is I've tried starting it up again, but it actually won't start because I was in as the root user when I opened SQL Developer this first time. So in order to make sure that that path gets stored for our Oracle user, which is the one we'll really want to use it for, we just need to switch back to the Oracle user. And then if we take a look here in our directory, we should be able to fire off SQL Developer one more time. And again, it'll ask us for the path because we're a different user. I will paste that path in. SQL Developer will open again. And this time when we go to use our shortcut from the application menu, SQL Developer should actually work for us. So just to prove that, I'll go ahead and close it. I'll come up here and go to Programming and SQL Developer. And this time around, we can see that SQL Developer actually opens up for our Oracle user, and we can then use SQL Developer as we would expect to be able to. Now, the reason I wanted to use and install SQL Developer is, one, it's just a handy tool for connecting to your various databases you might want to connect to, but we can also make our life pretty easy here by going ahead and creating the pluggable database we need to do our OBIEE install with. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new connection. And I know that my database server is up and running. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect to this database. And I'm going to do it as the sys user. And I will connect as sysdba. And then you'll see down here that it's just got sort of the standard stuff here. Now this database isn't actually running on my local machine here. It's running on another EC2 instance, and I've done a post about how to install the Oracle database on EC2 instance. So what I'm going to do is go over to my EC2 console and get the private IP, and this is very important that you get the private IP for my database server and put that number in there. Now the reason it's so important that you use a private IP is I haven't configured my instances to use a static IP. So if I were to use a public IP, I would end up actually, the next time I restarted the system and tried to connect to the database, it wouldn't work because the public IP would have changed. So if we use the public or the private IP, that value actually doesn't change on us for our AWS instances. So that's why it's so important to put the that IP number in there. And I can see that I made a little mistake there. And so now if I test this, I should see that I am able to connect successfully to this other server running the Oracle database server utilizing this private IP address. And I'm going to go ahead and connect, and I am connected to that database. Now the next thing I'm going to want to do is actually just use my handy DBA panel here, and I'm going to use this connection to also connect to the database. And when I expand out here, I'll see under my container database I have a couple of pluggable databases that I've created for other instances here. But what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and create a new pluggable database that we can use as a part of this install. So I'll just call this my OBIEE example PDB database. And it'll be important to remember this name here because we'll need that. And then let it create all the data files it needs for this. And then really that should be about all you need to do. You go ahead and click apply, and it will create a new pluggable database for you. Now what's important is before being able to actually connect to this pluggable database, you're going to need to make sure that the database is open read write. And you know, after you've got it created, there's a number of posts out there on the internet how to auto start your database and also auto start your pluggable databases when your database server is fired up. But if you don't want to go through that, you can always just come into these panels and start them from here. So if I take a look at my pluggable database I just created, you can see it's in a mounted mode, which means we wouldn't be able to connect to it. But I can go ahead here and click the open option by right-clicking on my pluggable database, and then we should see here when we refresh a couple of times. Actually, we may actually, oh yeah, we need to use the modify pluggable state. I'm going to set this state to open in read-write mode. Go ahead and click apply here. You'll see it'll run that command, and now our databases, our pluggable database is open in read-write mode and ready for us to use as a part of our OBIEE install. If we wanted to prove this to ourselves, we could open up our connection over here again, and we could just call this 12C DB pluggable database. We can use the same username, and instead of using the SID, we'll use the service name, and that'll just track with the name of our pluggable database. So now that I have it up and running, I should be able to enter this information, hit test. You'll see it's successful. We can save that connection if we want to check on it at a later point, and then just to prove that we can connect, we can go ahead and connect to it. So our pluggable database is up and running on a separate database server on a separate EC2 instance, and we can use those connection parameters as a part of our OBIEE install. So I'm going to go ahead and just minimize SQL Developer at this point. I'm going to close the other window I had open here, and now I'm going to switch over to my inventory directory, and we can actually begin the install process for our OBIEE instance. Now, first thing that we're going to want to do is actually lay down the the middleware portion or the middleware infrastructure that's needed as a part of this. So we've already set our Java home, and for our Oracle user, which we are currently using here, the Java home is set. So now we should be able, if we're in this inventory directory, just be able to issue this command. And so you'll see that this is, when we hit this, going to actually fire up an installer for the creation of our middleware home that we will ultimately install our Oracle Business Intelligence instance into. All right, we can see here after just a minute or so, it will fire up this installer for us. And one thing we're going to want to make sure to do is actually to point at our UO1 directory where we've attached a volume specifically for our software here. So we'll just go ahead and prefix the path it gave us with UO1 and say OK. And now we will just go ahead and say next. We're going to skip our auto updates. Again, we are just going to prefix the path it gives to us with UO1. We're going to go ahead and take just the Fusion middleware infrastructure. And then this really takes very little time. We're going to go ahead and say we do not wish to be updated and confirm. And now you can see it's just telling us where it's going to install everything, where the log files will be located, and you know what's going to be installed on the machine here. So I'm going to go ahead and click install. And then this particular process only takes a couple of minutes, and we'll be able to move on to the actual BI install. Okay, now that the install has completed, we can just go ahead and click next here. And it'll just give us a little a summary what's happened. Everything is installed correctly, and I can go ahead and click finish on the installer. So now that we've completed that piece, we're going to go ahead and run this BI platform script that's in here. So if we clean up our screen over here, and then just list our software again, we can see that this I've extracted this BI platform 12.2.1 bin file, and that's what we're actually going to execute. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and again it's just gonna, after a minute, open up the installer so we can actually lay down the software for our business intelligence instance now. Alright, so once the installer comes up on our screen, again we'll just want to use our UO1 prefix, and we'll skip the auto updates. And then when you reach here, if you hit the drop down, it should be aware of the Oracle home that has been created. And now we'll take the BI platform distribution with samples. You can see it's all ready to go for the install here, and we'll go ahead and click install. And now this actually takes a little bit longer than the WebLogic install does, so we'll just give the installer time to do what it does. Okay, now that the installer has completed its task, we can go ahead and click next, and now we'll go ahead and click finish. So what's just maybe a little different about the 12C install of OBI as opposed to the 11G version of it is that it doesn't automatically just start up the configuration process and fire up an instance. You actually have to kind of do that separately here. So I am going to switch to the directory where the BI software has been installed. And then if we list here, we can see that this config.sh is here. And if we fire up the config, this will actually open up the configuration assistance that'll let us finish really the configuration of our new BI environment. So you may not want all of the pieces of OBI installed, but in this case I'm just going to go ahead and let them all go on here. Now that it's passed its prerequisite checks, you can see it's picking up on where it's going to do our domain. I'll just go ahead and let it do the default name for the domain. I'm going to give my WebLogic user a password. And now this is where the installer is also a little bit different than in 11G. Now you could choose to use the RCU tool and create your own schema. And there's some reasons you may want to do that, but if you're just doing a dev environment, you may want to just let your the configuration assistant do it for you. So I find that to be quite a bit handier. So I'm going to just go ahead, give it a schema prefix. We will give it a password. We know that we're using an Oracle database. We will give it the sysuser. And then our connect string is really pretty easy. We'll just go back to our SQL developer instance here. And if we look at the properties of the connection that we used here, we really just need this host name or IP address, the port, and the service name. So I'm going to grab the host name here, paste this in, and then we put in the port name, and then we put in our service name. And now that we have that in here, we should be able to go ahead and click next. And I'm just going to go ahead and let it set the use default port ranges for this instance. And yep, we'll just go ahead and take the sample app Lite here. I'm not upgrading or just doing a blank environment. And now before it sets off on the configuration here, it's just giving us some information about where things are going to be installed, what parameters that we've given to it, and then you can see here it's going to tell us for this host where our console, EM, BI server, and analytics are going to reside. So you may remember, I think way back at the beginning, I had guessed at 7001 for the port that we needed to open to be able to access our console. It looks like it'll actually be 9500 to get to console and EM, and then 9502 to get to our BI server and analytics. So we'll take a look at that when this is all squared away. So this part of the process actually takes probably 15 or 20 minutes, at least on instance of this size. So we will go ahead and let it run. You can see that it's going about creating the schemas needed for the OBIEE instance and the domain, and we'll just let the configuration assistant run, and when it's complete, we'll go from there. All right, so after maybe, geez, as much as half an hour, our BI configuration assistant has actually finished, and you can see it's been successful. And now if we click next here, you can see again we just kind of get some of the details about our system here. So these are the internal URLs for the BI instance that we have here. So if we go and open Firefox, so before opening this, I'm just going to go ahead and save, and I will save this file into our, this is fine, this is the Oracle home location, and we'll just call this urls.txt, and we'll go ahead and save that and click finish. All right, now that you have your OBIEE installed, you should be able to, using the IP address of your machine and then port 9502 if you're going after analytics, or 9500 if you're going after the WebLogic console or EM, be able to go to the Firefox web browser inside of your Linux desktop and access your OBIEE instance and be able to sign into it. Now, if you want to be able to access these instances from outside your Linux instance, it's pretty simple to handle actually. And the way that we do that, I'll just pull this over here. As you can see, I have got my OBIEE instance sitting here, and you can see that we have these rules for our security groups, and we had talked about this at the beginning. What you want to do is actually make sure that the rules that you have for your security group allow traffic on the ports that you need. So I've come and I have entered rules for 22. It's default to get there by SSH. The 3389 is what allows us to actually RDP to this instance. And then the 9500 will allow us to get to EM in the console, and 9502 will allow us to get to analytics. Now, if you don't have static IP configured every time that you come to your instance here, the public access is gonna, the URL is gonna change just slightly to reflect the new public DNS entry you get. You can see I have these open to anywhere. You'll want to change that probably to something a little more specific, but for a dev instance that's going to be changing every time, you know, it's up to you how much you want to secure it, but you can certainly configure this IP to specific ranges or specific IPs to lock down your instance just a little bit more. So I'm going to go back here and just take a look at the IP address for my OBIEE machine that I've got up and running here. I'll go ahead and copy that, and because I have those ports configured to be open, I should be able to just put in 9500 / console, and you can see there's my OBIEE instance that is running on my EC2 machine. If I wanted to reach the EM login page, I could just go ahead and hit EM, and same thing will happen, and it'll pull that up. And then if I want to get to my analytics instance here, I can just go ahead and type in 9502 and analytics. And now we can see, because we have those ports open, we can access this OBIEE instance that we have on our EC2 machine from any web browser in the world at this point. So last couple things I want to show you about OBIEE, and this is just from the install perspective, making this quick and easy for you when you want to turn it on and off. All right, I've got SQL Developer open here, and you can see I've got a connection set up for my container database. And if we connect to that, we'll see that there's a number of objects here. What we want to take a look at is triggers. You may recall that we set up our OBIEE repository on a pluggable database, and we can take a look at that by utilizing the DBA panel here. And if we connect utilizing that container database, we can go ahead and take a look at the container databases that we have available here. So if I want to auto start any one of these, I can actually use a trigger, and there's two approaches that we can take. We can either say, let's start all of the container databases at startup, or we can just start individual ones, and I prefer the individual approach. So if we take a look here at this trigger that we've got, you can see that basically what it does is it just, after the startup, executes the alter pluggable database, and I've got a particular pluggable database specified here. And so this guarantees that every time you start up your database, this particular pluggable database will also be opened in a read-write mode. And you can find this script on the companion post to this video, and it's pretty easy. Just execute this script, and then your pluggable databases will auto start. Also on that post is some links to how to auto start your database instance with your EC2 instance, so that every time you fire up your EC2 instance, your database will start automatically, and then if you have these triggers in place, your pluggable databases will start automatically as well. So if you've got your database set to auto start, then one of the other things you may be interested in is setting up your OBIEE instance to auto start. So there's sort of two things you need to do in order to make this possible. So the first thing you need to do is set up a boot properties file for your WebLogic instance that OBIEE is running on. So you can see here that I've switched to my BI domain under this admin server folder, and if we list our contents here, I've also created this security directory, and you can find the link to the documentation on how to do this on the companion post again. But if we take a look at this security directory that we have here, you can see that I have created a boot.properties file. And all that you put in this boot.properties file is the WebLogic username and password, and then when you start your OBIEE instance, it will not prompt you for the username and password anymore. So once you've got the once you have the boot.properties file set up so that your WebLogic instance won't prompt during your OBIEE startup, the next thing you'll want to do is actually set up a script that will auto start your OBIEE instance when your EC2 instance starts up. Now, the great thing about OBIEE 12c is they have vastly simplified the startup procedure. So it makes it a lot easier to create an auto start setup than it used to be in 11g. And really all you have to do is execute one script in order to make your the entirety of your OBIEE instance start up. So what I've done is actually borrowed from the auto start setup for the Oracle database and done exactly the same thing for the OBIEE instance with just a couple of changes. So if we switch there's a couple different things I want to show you. First of all, if we take a look, there's a directory where your startup scripts live for OBI, and we can switch to that. And so if we switch to this and we take a look here, you can see that all the sort of admin scripts are located here, and it's really this start.sh and stop.sh will handle the complete startup and shutdown of your OBI instance now, as opposed to in 11G when there was several separate scripts you had to run to get the whole thing set up. So this, like I was saying, makes our life easy when it comes to creating a auto start and stop script for our BI instance. So what I'm going to do is just switch to the etc initd directory. And if we take a look in here, you can see that I've actually just used the DB Aura script that is part of a number of different posts you can find out on the internet on how to auto start your Oracle database. And I'm a big fan of being lazy, so I don't like to redo stuff I don't have to. So if we take a look at this script, and I'll have to switch to root to be able to do it. You can see that this is verbatim copied from the Tim Hall's post on auto starting the Oracle database. And the only thing that I've done to this script to make it work for OBIEE is under this Oracle home right here, I have changed that to the directory right above bin where the OBI startup scripts live. And then you can see if we scroll down a little bit here, under the start, I have just changed this to reference the start.sh for OBI in this area, and then in the stop, I've done the same thing for the stop script. And so making those three simple changes to this script will make your OBI instance auto start and auto stop when you start and stop your EC2 instance. As long as you remember to start up your database first, your OBI instance should auto start without incident. The commands to set this up are all listed on the companion post. And really the only thing you have to do is set the permissions on this particular file and then add it to the startup routine that Linux goes through, and then your OBI instance will auto start whenever you turn on your EC2 instance, which I find to be extremely handy because after you've actually done the startup scripts once or twice, it's always kind of boring. So if you set your database up to auto start and your OBI instance up to auto start, getting these environments up and going for development work is really just a matter of pushing a couple buttons inside of your Amazon control panel, and easy is the way I like things. So okay, now that we have completed showing you the auto start setup for OBI, that's really the start, how to install OBI from start to finish. And if you follow along with this YouTube video and the companion posts I have on my blog, you should be able to install OBIEE 12C on an EC2 instance and have a instance of OBI that you can fire up for development purposes on demand. And then if you turn it off when you're not using it, I think you'll find that you have a very affordable option for creating development and research instances on demand that Doesn't require you to sort of go through internal channels in an organization, or if you don't have a laptop or a computer that you work with that has the capacity to hold this type of software, then this makes a very affordable and easy way to do it yourself.